Right, so let's make a start if we can. So I'm pleased to see quite a lot of you here. I didn't go to the wine and cheese last night, but I know when you all came back. So some of you obviously were I think the party continued down by the lake by the sound of things, but it's good to see so many of you here for this plenary session. So we've got a session now on precision livestock farming. That's what PLF stands for. I think we assume everyone knows that, but maybe not everyone does. So this is using technology to monitor animals in terms of monitoring their health and their welfare and improving their management. And we're going to be focusing on measuring welfare and behaviour in this session. So our first speaker is Janice Siegford. Janice, you're here. So I'm going to hand pretty much straight over to you. What I will just say to the speakers, if I can remember to do this, you will get a 2-minute warning. So for the speakers today, you'll have a 2-minute warning, and then you'll get an end. And I will come and push you off the stage if you don't end when I'm waving the end piece of paper.
Fair enough.
Over to you.
Good morning, everybody. I'm glad to see so many perky faces today. So hopefully you stay perky through my talk. I'm really happy to see all of you face to face. I think that's been a theme among our Congress, that yay, we are back in person and able to enjoy each other's company and all the great science that we do all together at once. And every time I look around, I see someone I hadn't seen yet before that I didn't know was here. So that's also exciting. So I will be leading us off this morning with a topic that's near and dear to my heart, which is the quest to develop automated systems for monitoring behavior. And I first started down this journey in about 2004, 2005, using pedometers on cattle before kind of going into developing systems for body-worn sensors for chickens, using computer vision for pigs, and now some for chickens as well. So I've been doing this for quite a while, and I'm still on the quest, if that might give you a clue as to how my talk is going to go. Before we begin, I want to throw a few caveats out there. First, this talk is going to focus mostly on livestock and poultry because that's what my team and I work on. So pigs, chickens, cattle are going to be where we start. Second, I'm going to be representing my team, who are a crew of talented experts in PLF development, and I'm an ethologist. So if I don't do justice to their brilliance, it is not their fault, it is mine, and I will apologize in advance for that. Okay, so let's get started with a couple of critical definitions. As people who work in the animal welfare realm, you probably appreciate the importance of starting off with making sure we are on the same page when we talk about these things. So as I started developing this talk, my colleague Thomas Norton said, "You're not really developing a talk on PLF, you're developing a talk on automated behavior monitoring." And I said, "What do you mean, Thomas?" And he said, "Well, when we think about automated behavior monitoring, what we're talking about is any kind of technology, whether we're doing video or audio or activity, that we're monitoring the behavior in an automated way. So some kind of technology is collecting the data for us, but then it doesn't necessarily take that data and turn it into actionable information that can be used by a commercial farmer or someone in the real world, right? We end up with a lot of data, but we didn't have to collect it. Okay, so the precision livestock farming piece, which some of you may get more into, involves using that data to then automate some management decisions or some actions on the farm that can help maybe target labor in a more efficient way. And precision livestock farming can be more than just monitoring behavior, right? We can monitor weight or body condition or animal temperature as well. So it's a bit bigger, and it's also a bit more designed to actually have a practical outcome that results in action and efficiency and improved welfare on the farm. So I'm a step back from that with the behavior monitoring. Okay, so now we're hopefully all on the same page with what I'm talking about today. But I will still say that behavior monitoring is important, right? I want it to be able to do research in my team. So hopefully many of you also feel the same way, that having automated behavior monitoring is still a big deal. Okay, unfortunately, I did not see this paper before I submitted my abstract. If I had, I might have thought, problem solved, no big deal, we're here, it's done. The future is now. We can automatically track individuals, we can identify them, and we can analyze their behavior, at least with monkeys and mice, according to this team. So fortunately, the selection committee also hadn't read this article, otherwise maybe I wouldn't be giving this talk. But so is this true, right? Have we solved it? And I get really excited when I see papers with titles like that also have videos like this, where, let's see if this plays. So you can see each of these macaques here is being tracked and their identities hopefully maintained even when those two macaques cross in the back. So that's a pretty impressive feat, right? We've got these monkeys being tracked in real time, their identities maintained even after they crossed each other and reappeared on the opposing sides. This is awesome, right? Okay, we can track animals. But then I always think, okay, what are probably the downsides to what's going on here? What is the rough spots the authors may have glossed over in the paper? Or more deeply, what are the accuracy and the precision and how long can you use this technology before it fails, right? So this program that they developed called SIPEC is 86% accurate at recognizing the identity of an individual macaque using just a single frame of video. It's pretty good, right? Well, humans are 100% accurate at it, okay? So we've already got 14% error right there in the initial recognition. And then if we think about like, can they recognize behaviors well over time, it's about 70% able to recognize these couple of specific behaviors that they characterized for the macaques. And when they used it in mice to try and maintain tracking of individuals over a period of time, each day the performance of that tracking dropped over time. And if they used the same mice in a water maze where they got wet, the tracking of the ability to identify the individual went to 0. Okay, so even for something as beautiful as this that shows like this really cool like proof of concept, there are problems. And if you start to have errors in your tracking, those multiply over time, right? So if you suddenly switch identities of an animal and then you are tracking the wrong animal now, but it's saying it's A instead of B, right? Your whole data set just went down the toilet. Okay, so, whoops, let's get past these mechanics. So ABM is only as good as it's trained to be. This is a really key point here, right? So they can present some really positive results, but until you dig in to exactly what they're looking at, how it was trained, who trained it, and what data they used, you really don't know very much, right? You can spin almost anything in an abstract in a positive light. Who's done that here before? Spin things in an abstract in a positive light when you had negative results. Oh, just me? Okay, sorry. All right, better not do that anymore. All right, so let's dig into some of these topics a little bit more. So developers with the right expertise and standards. So most ABM or PLF, if you go even further, is developed by a team, right? You can't do this typically on your own. And at the core of the team are the computer or the data scientists, the people who are doing the coding, the people who are building the algorithms for the machine learning that's going to detect the behavior and figure out how to process and handle the data, right? They're central. So you have to have those folks in the room in order to get this done. And then if you're talking about some kind of tech that you're building customized for your particular purpose, a particular type of sensor, rather than using an off-the-shelf camera, you probably have some engineers on the team too. And maybe even some agricultural engineers who understand that the real world where animals live is dirty, messy, changeable, and that animals like to break things. Okay, so maybe you've got that much expertise on the team, but it's fairly rare to have an ethologist with formal training in ethology, or even better, if you want it to have welfare implications, with that ability to make the connection all the way out to that level. So are the people who are developing this stuff to detect behaviors, do they actually know what they're detecting? Do they know how to describe the behavior the way we would? Do they know how to break it down into the components in ways that are important for us when we're collecting data? So if they say they're collecting tail biting data and then they call it aggression, how many of you would immediately shake your heads and go, oh dear God, right? Okay, so we have to start with the right expertise. And if you don't understand why that thing is not true, talk to me later. Okay, so we've got to have the expertise, and then we've got to have good data to work with from the start. So how much data do you have? How long? How many different files of data? How many independent instances? How many complete data sets do you have? And so what kind of context have you collected it in? Is it all been one type of pen system, or one type of aviary system, or one kind of farm? Or have you just collected data from the same pen of animals, even within a single building over and over? So what is your replication? And of course, it's even more critical when we think, how many animals have you looked at? Because we know that within a single barn of animals, there can be Each animal is an individual and does things slightly differently. Yes, a walk is a walk, but each animal has its own subtle differences in gait, right? And so we have to be able to recognize that variability and to distinguish between different kinds of behavior when that single variable behavior can be variable. So, and we also, if we're using something like computer vision or actually almost any of these technologies, no matter what modality, we can have variation that also changes with animal age and gender and characteristics like that. So if I develop a computer vision program trained to detect in poultry, and I start with a chick and I train my program on the chick, and then I try to extend it for use in pullets, how well do you think that will work? Right? They are different in size. They are different in morphometry, right? Their shape has changed as they grow. And then if I extend it from what I trained on a chick out to a hen, oops, and God forbid I throw a rooster into the mix, right? So if I've trained it on a chick, is it going to recognize anything any of these other birds do with any degree of accuracy? Okay. So we have to think about what the data were that were used as the basis. And then we all understand the importance of this, right? We often have colleagues who think that, behavior, you just go out and you watch an animal. It's fine, right? You don't have to have any formal plan to this. You just go look and see what you see. And it's fine, you get data, right? But we know from our work that it's really important to set up your data recording really correctly, really rigorously, with really well-trained people. You develop a precise ethogram that says this is and this is not the behavior according to these characteristics. You train your decoding team or your observation team, and you check to see if they're equally reliable and if they stay reliable over time, because we don't want things drifting. Because the human, right, in this ABM case is the gold standard. We are the truth against which the ABM is measured. And if we are just a rusty tin can, then what, garbage in, garbage out, right? So we have to start with good training of the people that are actually doing the manual decoding, which is used as the basis for training the program later to detect what we detected, okay? So I've worked on teams with engineers, and two of my former postdocs are in the audience who had this problem, where we've been working with engineers and we're like, no, we need an ethogram for the aggression. We need an ethogram for the aggression. You can't just say it showed aggression. What do you mean by that? What behavior subcomponents are you looking at? And so we had to keep pushing to get them to do this. Okay, so then we have, how much did you decode? 10 minutes? I got, last month I was at a conference where an undergrad was so excited that he decoded sitting in pigs. He trained ABM to detect sitting in pigs after looking at 10 minutes of video from one pen of pigs with 6 animals. I was like, okay, good, awesome. So we have all these questions about how much, right, in order to be truly representative, and how was it decoded? So when you have this data set, then afterwards, it has to have all of this information so that you understand the context and you say, oh, okay, I'm reading this paper and they use these kinds of animals on this kind of farm at this time of day with these kinds of lighting conditions. Maybe it will work in my barn, right? Or maybe, oh dear, I have totally different light. I'm using a different coat color of animals. This is not going to work. So you have to understand all these parameters, and these things are typically not reported in ABM papers, okay? So one of my pleas to everybody in this room is, if you're working with teams on this stuff, please make sure that these details are provided in the methods section. Sometimes you're lucky if all you get is the species of animal that was studied, okay? That is not sufficient information to know if you can replicate or extend it. Okay. Now here we have a very non-trivial problem. How was the ABM validated? And by validated, I mean, how did we test this algorithm, this process? It's actually as good as it's claimed to be, that it does what it's supposed to do. So 2 key questions here are, who did the validation? And which data did they use to validate it? The most common strategy, I would say in over 90% of the cases, is a process known as internal validation, where the same team takes a data set and they divide it randomly into a test set and a training set. And they might decide the proportion, you know, maybe it's 50-50, maybe it's 70-30, whatever. But basically they are training, the same team is doing the training, and then they take the remaining data that was pulled out and they test, right? More robust approach, of course, is if a different team with a whole new set of data then tries to see if this can work. So you have people not familiar with how the ABM runs, trying it novelly, right? To see if it works for them or if they're like, I have no idea how to make this run. And then you have a completely different set of data so you can test generalizability and robustness, right? So external validation is better, but very rare. So if you have this internal validation going on, well, how can you do better? And there are ways that you can do this. You can go beyond random validation to some kind of blocked strategy, because all of the data sets we work with, they have underlying structure. Animals change over time, or there are differences between pens that we have to account for and which we would account for if we were doing statistics, right? So we can account for that in how we parse the data for training and testing, and that will at least make it robust. So for example, you could take a data set with animals at a younger period and see if when you train the ABM there, you can predict the same level of accuracy with that ABM for older animals, okay? So I have an example from our group. Our PhD student, Junjie Han, compared validation strategies, because you look in the literature and you're like, wow, 90% accuracy, 90% precision, this is great, right? Or sometimes, as in the left panel here, those recalls and precisions almost hit 100%. Like, this seems like it's perfect. This program works beautifully. So what Junjie had done is he trained an ABM to detect the behavior of 2 pigs in a single space feeder. So we have an automated feeder designed for 1 pig, but of course, other pigs like to try and come in and knock the first pig out of the way, or maybe just harass the first pig in the feeder. So we were trying to detect, how often does this happen? Does it cause problems in feeding and intake and all that stuff? So he classified things as no contact between the 2 pigs, gentle head to body, or levering, where the behind pig shoves the front pig up, or mounting. So those are the abbreviations down there. So when he just selected the data randomly into a 50-50 data set, we got these really great numbers. But when Junjie took the first data set and compared it to data we'd collected 3 weeks later as the validation, you get the block by time panel that shows up here, where especially precision drops pretty dramatically for something like levering. So now the program's only 40% accurate at detecting levering behavior, okay? So just by looking at pigs 3 weeks later, when they're a bit bigger and their proportions are a bit different, suddenly things change in how good this ABM is. This is a confusion matrix, and this is something we can use to try to tell where the error is coming from. So the diagonal axis right here, this is when things match up between the target and the prediction. Okay, so we have the ground truth, and then we're seeing how well the prediction lines up. So when things fall off the side of the axis, like here, that shows a misclassification. So the common misclassification that we were finding was that head to body contact was being misclassified by the program as either levering or mounting, which were more severe behaviors. And another common problem we saw was that head to body and no contact was being misclassified as the pigs grew. So simply by looking at our data differently, like using that later data set as the test data set, we found that there were some errors in how robust the program was at truly detecting those behaviors in different age classes of animals. Okay, so another problem is that ABM solutions are often too focused, okay? So we develop an ABM to detect one specific type of behavior or one specific type of problem, right? And that may be really necessary. Maybe we're trying to reduce cannibalism or tail biting, right? Something really problematic that has a big effect. And we did some work in our team, working with Thomas Norton's crew and Chen, his postdoc, where we detected aggression versus no aggression in pigs in a nursery. Or we detected feeding behavior versus no feeding behavior for the pigs in the nursery. Or we did drinking versus no drinking behavior for the pigs in the nursery. So we could classify each of those 3 conditions quite well against the background of the other behaviors. But that's pretty simplistic, right? If we're trying to look at like time budgets of animals and how patterns change over time, and kind of a really complex look at the whole animal's life, not just this one little aspect of something that it's doing. Well, so we have this problem, but maybe we can combine these things, right? Maybe we can put the algorithm we used for the aggression together with the feeding, together with the drinking, and then we can start to actually get a more robust time budget from all of these pigs in the nursery that accounts for all their variation in behavior. So there's starting to be a bit of progress in this area, but we're still a long way off from just having a pig behavior detection program that we can plug and play that will detect all the things that piglets do over the course of a day in the nursery pen, right? So that's something probably some of you have encountered, and I know in the talks to come later, there are some talks that demonstrate some nice solutions geared at one particular problem. So for me as a behaviorist, one of the big kind of bummer take-home messages is that there's limited plug and play ABM. And what I mean by this is I'm not a coder, okay? I can't program diddly squat. Like I'm lucky I can put my passcode in my phone, okay? So I can't take an algorithm written in Python or R or something and actually modify it to fit my situation. I need an app with a nice graphical user interface that I can put a couple key variables in and then hit go at the bottom. And there's not that much out there, right? Maybe if you're working in the cattle area, you are far luckier than the rest of us because there's much more of this for cattle than there is for any other species. If you're in poultry, you're just out of luck, sorry. So why? Why is this the case? Come on, ABM developers, get with the program, literally. So back to that problem of small data sets. A lot of ABM, if you do a search through the literature and you look at how big the data sets are, most ABM programs have been developed using less than 50 animals. Okay, in many cases, less than a dozen. So that's a problem if, let's say, they built it to detect those like pigs in those little nursery pens that I just showed you, and now I want to extend it to finisher pigs in bigger pens, or maybe on straw, or maybe now on this gridded flooring, but like with 1,000 pigs in the room, or maybe in an electronic sow feeding system with barriers in the room, or God forbid I go outside in the mud and the actual natural light, right? I can't take that ABM that was built on that small data set, even if it was plug and play, and turn it out there. The other problem is we don't have a lot of stuff that's commercialized, right? It hasn't yet hit the marketplace where we can just go out and buy it. It's all either built for customization, or you work with a researcher who is in the computer science realm that can build it for you. And I went through this process with a chicken Fitbit, essentially, and 6 years later, I still don't have a chicken Fitbit that I can just put on a chicken and use to collect behavior research data. That's all I wanted. Anyway, I'm not bitter, it's fine. So there's many that are not commercialized. As I said, in the cattle realm, there's probably more because we also link them to robotic milking systems and to milking machines so that we can get data on things like estrus detection or health problems like ketosis, or just whether or not we need to increase the feed on a particular animal because her weight is changing as she's going into lactation. This is an example of a commercial product for pigs, Sound Talks, where you can actually do cough monitoring of pigs, but at the pen level, right? And that's often not refined enough for those of us that want to do individual animal kind of work. And there's an example of a pedometer in cattle from ICE Robotics. So there are some tools out there, but they're often fairly limited in application, despite the fancy web pages that may advertise, these ones do automated behavior monitoring. And then you look at the list of behaviors that are monitored and you're like, oh, mine's not on there. Or that time budget is really flimsy. Okay. So another problem that we're facing right now is the artificial intelligence, the AI that we're using to create the ABMs. It's not yet as smart as we are, which personally I still find comforting and reassuring. But it limits us in terms of what we can do, right? So living animals are complex. You have all of this stuff that changes in an animal as it's behaving, let alone as it's growing, maturing, lactating, gestating, or whatever. So our bodies, right, they almost deform and change proportions as we go from one behavior to another. And certainly for some animals like an octopus, they take that to the extreme with how much they could deform as they're performing a single behavior. So when you have an AI that's trained to maybe detect a can rolling or cans occluding each other or cars changing direction, it's still a very static thing that is changing what it's doing. The car doesn't change proportion as it goes around the corner. Maybe the wheels move a little bit, but it doesn't arc, right? The body of the car does not change, but the body of a pig as it goes around a corner does change. So computers are not as good yet at detecting this variability, right, in the animal side of things. And of course, all of us that have worked in animal environments with trying to get cameras in the right place, we know this problem of occlusion, where the feeder is in the way, the drinker line is in the way. Oh, wait, the other animal is in the way. And they're always in the way, right? How many, we have piles of animals in these spaces. So they pile up and then they separate. How do we keep track of them as they cross over or under or through each other? We can often do it fairly well, but the computer still doesn't do this well. Strangely, they can do it better with like mice and fruit flies, which I'm like, how do you tell them apart? And then we have things that leave and re-enter the field of view. Sometimes it's most economical for us to have a single camera, but that means that you're going to see animals coming and going, and can the computer pick them back up? And some of these problems we're making headway. We're just maybe not perfect yet. And our brains, we're capable of doing several things yet that AI can't. And we're very good at combining all of our sensory information really quickly all at once, right? So I can tell a pig coughing because I can both localize the sound and see the body posture of the pig and its motion at the same time and put those together without even thinking about it, right? I don't have to cognitively, consciously think about it. We're also using multiple types of learning and memory, right? Different kinds of induction and deduction to come to a conclusion by putting all these little tiny facts together to say, yep, that's that behavior. And different kinds of previous memory and recall. And all of these things are still a bit too complicated for a computer to do as quickly as we do. So real-time monitoring and detection is still far easier for us than for a computer system. We'll get there probably. Okay, so sorry, this was a bummer of a talk, right? Now what? How do we actually get to where we want to be? How do we get to these miraculous little thingies that we can plug in and say, detect the behavior for me, right? So we want to accurately identify and track, especially unmarked animals, right? If you've ever done studies in a big group of animals where you have to track individuals and you have like 300,000 brown chickens that all look alike, oh, this is a problem. Okay, so how do we get there? Especially when we house them in large, dense groups that are, we don't have a lot of space between animals. So how do we identify and record the frequencies and the durations, but also the intensities and the patterns and the variations in the behavior? So counting things and recording durations is one thing, but getting to the more complex stuff of what this all means in terms of patterns is much harder. And then another thing is, how do we localize where this is happening and who it's happening with? And this is really critical for so much of the social stuff that we look at with the animals in our groups. Who's doing what together? So when are we going to get there? When are we going to have this plug and play ABM that eliminates the hours and hours and hours and hours and hours and hours, hours? You get the picture of us observing and decoding, right? When? Well, there are a few. I can't give you that answer. If I could, I'd go out and invest in the stock market right now. Good. But we can do a few things that will help us. So first of all, on our side, we can get a little bit more training in these computer and data science areas, right? We can gain a little more competence. We can figure out how to do some rudimentary coding, right? We can figure out what it means when we're looking at a machine learning algorithm and they're talking about a deep neural network that has this many nodes. Yeah, we can start to get there. Some of you are shaking your head like, no, do that. On the other side, then maybe we can do this. We can create intuitive ABM. So maybe part of it is we learn it a bit better, but also we get ABM that actually works with us non-expert coders a bit better. So developing easier interfaces like apps, or using things like natural language processing where I could say, okay, go out and detect feather pecking in this chicken population to the program. I say it, it interprets me correctly, and it does it, just like a grad student would. Sorry. Okay. Another thing we can do as ethologists is we can actually help generate some of the data sets that computer vision people or whoever the ABM developers use, right? We have been decoding data for years. And some of us have the video files or the audio files or the activity files, plus all this annotated data. So can we put some of that together and share it so that other people can use it and then make detection programs from it? So I put up here a series of different cattle pictures, right? And I haven't even captured all the variability that's possible in a cattle population or the types of cattle housing out there. But what you can get from this is, right, we can't just train stuff on one herd of Holsteins in a freestall barn. or one group of Black Angus out on a pasture, we need a lot of stuff. We need calves, we need cows, we need steers, we need bulls, we need indoor, we need outdoor, we need different coat colors, we need horns and no horns, udders and no udders, right? We need a lot of stuff. So we need variation. And many of us who've been collecting data from different types of animals from around the world, we have that. We have local indigenous populations, or we have variations in coat colors and things like that. And so we could contribute. So we have more animal data, more variation, and we annotate, right? We know all those important things about like time of day and age of the animal, breed of the animal, right? Things like that. And then we need to share it. And it is getting easier to do this in the cloud, right? We can do this more easily. And there are great data sets out there that AI people around the world use all the time for like facial recognition or training autonomous vehicles. But these public data sets, when they have animals, they're typically like dogs and horses in the family environment, or maybe like backyard chickens. They're not animals in production settings. They're not animals in many of the contexts that we need. So we can make a little bit of progress using some of these data sets, but we need our own kinds of animal-based data sets that meet our criteria. So we did a search. Junjie, again, as part of his PhD, did a search to see, so what's out there if we wanted to do some ABM using animals, and he specifically focused on computer vision, and he looked at cattle and pig data sets, and he found 20 that were publicly available. So all the images and video, plus all the annotation and kind of the labeling for the context of things like that. So 8 of them were for entire body detection of the animal, 4 were for specific body parts, 8 did animal ID, and all of these are important for the behavior part, but only 6 of them went as far as what's the behavior. So we had 5 data sets from pigs and 1 from cattle that we identified. And here's just a little bit about the details. All of these are available online, so you can search for them using the data set name and find them if you wanted to use them to develop some ABM. And they were used for published papers detecting these types of behavior that are listed in the behavior type category. And so you can see that in at least 3 cases, we've only got 2 things detected: lying or not lying, investigating, exploring, sitting, standing. And in a few cases, we get to 4 to 5, or maybe even 6 behaviors. But that's still a pretty small number of behaviors for the entire repertoire that these species have, right? So there's work that's being done. And then if you look at how much was annotated, then you can also see that in some cases there wasn't very much. In the pig position and posture data set, only 305 images were used. That's not a lot. That's probably like 10 seconds of data, 30 frames per second, okay? So we have some small data sets that are out there. So one of the things we're trying to do to combat this is Juan Steibel, one of the kind of leaders of our team, is working on this project called FACT-CIN, and it's a coordinated innovation network where we're trying to put together groups of people working specifically in the computer vision space to solve animal agriculture kind of problems. So we're building reference data sets that we're going to generate and share. We're going to annotate. We're going to provide baseline analysis. And we're also going to develop standards for how to create these reference data sets. So if somebody else wants to contribute one, here's the information you should provide along with your data set. Here's how you should package it, et cetera. And we're also going to provide some help on evaluating results. What validation strategy should you use to know how good it was? How should you go about that? Okay, so conclusion. So we need your help, right? To make ABM, all of us need to contribute our expert data sets so that we can actually get stuff that decodes it the way we want and gives us the results and information that we can use. So if you've got data sets that are lying around and you're just like, I just haven't figured out how to upload those 54 terabytes of video, that would be me. I have one of those. Try to get there, try to make that a priority. And then work together with ABM teams and try to convince them of the importance of ethograms and rigorous training and more animal variability in the data sets so that we get things that are more robust and can be generalized. With that,
right, a very long round of applause for a great talk. So whilst people think about questions, I've just really got a comment to make. And I think it's fairly apparent. You're probably familiar with the Gartner height curve, are you? So it's a curve of sort of development of technology. So I think the engineers led us through this peak of inflated expectations. You've actually brought some realization that we are in the trough of disillusionment, which is one of the sort of the bottom bit. But actually, you then go to the slope of enlightenment. So actually, I think you've got a great way forward. And ethologists, we really do need to engage with this program. I think the engineers, they do think this behavior stuff, oh, it's all too easy. They don't realize what we need to do. So open for questions. Yes. Again, if you can just say where you're from.
Hi, Janice. Lucy Asher, Newcastle University. Thanks for a nice talk. I'm interested in what you were saying about ethograms and time budgets, etc. How much do we as ethologists need to adapt our methods and our approaches to these new challenges and opportunities from automated behaviour analysis?
That is a beautiful question, because one of the actual sticking points with going from us humans doing kind of intuitive, like looking maybe over a series of images to get a behavior versus the computer is that the time scales and the features that we're using to get there are very different. So, if you have to break things down on a frame by frame analysis for the computer program, you're seeing very static things. Yet when we're doing behavior for our observational studies, we're typically doing a kind of a moving, changing thing as we process the behavior, like something like dust bathing, right? Which can be a fairly long sequence of multiple small sub-behaviors and postures and movements. Yeah, so it's really important, I think, to have that conversation and think, how do we break this apart into the right pieces so the human decoders do a good job of giving the computer scientists the data they need to do the training at the computer scale? Great question, thank you.
Right, we do have a second question, which is just over the other side. Basil will be third. We don't have any questions online yet, so for the Zoom, for those of us following us on Zoom, put your questions in the Q&A if you have any questions, and we'll come to you, but we don't seem to have any at the moment.
Mike Descano, University of Bern. Thanks, Janice, great talk. I was curious, the data that we can generate with these systems is also very, very novel, whereas a grad student historically could generate 20 minutes of video over the project. Now we can have hours and hours and days of precision location. So also, do you have any thoughts on how that data should be analyzed, or even does that require a new school of thought or anything along those lines?
No, I think that also provides opportunities for us to expand how we think about things, right? Maybe a little bit of a paradigm shift on our end, because we've often wanted to just break things down into simple frequencies or durations, right? And we lose a lot of subtlety and like animal reality in that process when we just kind of condense into averages and things. So we do need that. And I know that, with some of the team you've been working with at Bern, you guys have come up with some pretty novel ways to look at time series kinds of data and to kind of keep track of some of that complexity over time. So we need to, I think, be willing to expand our skill sets. And I know sometimes the realm of the computer side of it, that's not why we got into applied ethology, right? We wanted to watch the animals. We wanted to be with the animals and to do things with them. So the fact that we sometimes have to engage in so much tech or math to get there, let's just be honest, math is tricky, right? But we need people with those kinds of skill sets too. And sometimes we have to forge longer term relationships. You can't just do these things over the course of a quick project and everybody understands everybody and then you've come up with a eureka thing, right? So sometimes forging longer relationships.
Short question, please. Short answer.
Yeah, Janice, you talked about the individual tracking and moving to larger groups. Can you talk a little bit about sort of how important it is to have a fixed identity in these large groups? Because there's also approaches now to look at pen level activity or stuff like that.
So we know individuals kind of a necessary thing at the welfare level, right? Welfare is experienced by an individual, not by a group. So when you look at the group average for welfare, you can miss all of that variation or the tails of the curve. So, but then when we're faced with commercial, I've been on laying hen farms in the US with 2.5 million chickens on a single farm. Yes, that is true. And they're even bigger in other parts of the world. So how do we feasibly keep track of that? And if we could collect the individual data, what would we do? So can we do smart sentineling for some individuals, but then have group stuff for the majority? maybe a blended approach is where we need to think about. Sorry, that wasn't that short.
No, that was good enough. Well, you led us bang on time to finishing because we have actually got some announcements. But first of all, let's thank Janice again.